Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of The South Side. Today, you are joined by myself, Adam, Danny, and Lewis from our regular crew, and we have our second guest for our third episode. We are joined by former Bucks Wolves founder, current all-time appearance holder, and our very own Reading Devils MVP, Callum Dean. How are you,
Thanks
Cal?
for having me on. I'm all good, mate. I'm all good. Pleasure to be on here.
Perfect. Do you want to give yourself a short intro for the small portion of the flag community who don't know who you are?
Yeah, for the people I am contacted or passing the fear to, yet in my career, started playing flag 2010. Yeah, like an after school club. Luckily, in Marlow, managed to get involved that way. Hated it at first, got involved, and then 15 years later, I'm still playing. As I said, managed to start up the Bulls adult flag team, our man, and been going successful. Managed to have my first season in the Prem with Reading this year, going to the National Division next season. I've been part of GB Silvers for the last 2 years as well. Enjoyed that as well. So
Good. Well, we're glad to have you because today our topic for discussion is talking about the new look Premiership and the all new national divisions and try and get an early insight into how those divisions will work. There's obviously been some massive shake-up with a number of teams, including ourselves, that were promoted from Division 1 to what will be a very new look Premiership. And you will be partaking yourself in the first season of the National, which will change the face of the top level of flag in this country, hopefully with an air towards a more competitive scene in that division with only the 12 best teams in the country, as per last year's rankings, will be taking place. Okay, and on that note, we'll take a short interlude and we'll jump straight into talking about the Premiership. Okay, so jumping straight in to look at the Premiership for the new season. Unless you've been living under a rock, you will know that the top 12 teams per the rankings as of last season were promoted to an all new division, the National. They'll be competing against each other in what will hopefully be a more competitive environment than previous years. What that means for the Premiership is that technically the 12 teams that have played in the Premiership last season and will still play in the Premiership the coming year were the bottom 12 of those teams. And in turn, the 12 remaining teams that make up the standard Premiership 2014 division were all promoted from Division 1. 8 of them automatically and 4 via one-off game play-ins. So it's worked out that the majority of teams are fairly evenly spread. But if I bring up our first graphic, and we love a graphic at the south side, this is our first stab at how we think those divisions are going to be aligned for the new year. Teams in green are teams that were established Premiership sides last year. Teams not in green were those promoted from Division 1. Couple of key points to look at, and we will discuss in terms of distance to travel, with the fact that 4 of the 6 national sides from the north that were promoted last year were Scottish. It means that there aren't that many Scottish teams left to make up a proper Highlands division. We've left the name, but it means that Border City Centurions and Newcastle Blackhawks, we've estimated, will be the teams pushed into the Highlands division to make up that 6. And for the sake of the graphic, we've assumed that the Premiership will continue with a 4-division, 6-team structure. We can discuss whether that could change, how that could change. I find it difficult to believe that it would, but it means Newcastle and Border City will have longer trips. From a north perspective, and most of those teams, if not all of those teams, are based in and around the Manchester area, so it didn't make a huge amount of sense for them to be moved, obviously with the main exception of Leicester, but they're further south than the rest of the teams. In fact, they probably would border on being part of the south, but due to the fact that there are 12 teams that fall into South criteria, and there was a slight swing, I think, from the Division 1 promotion, where I think there was a slightly increased number of southern teams versus northern teams. In turn, what that has meant is that Leicester, as the most northern of those teams, have been bumped to the north or north/Midlands division, however it gets renamed. The second point of controversy, well, the second point we will discuss, and we've got a second graphic that we'll show you later because it involves us, is with the fact there's 12 teams in the south, there is a big spread. There is a big question, I think, over whether us, Bucks Wolves, or Reading Diablos, the Reading B team, will move to the southwest, southeast, who will be playing where, because of the fact that we are so closely located to one another, and we're kind of going to have to split one way or the other. But before we get into the nitty gritty, looking at the graphic as an overview, I guess my first question, I'll pose it to you, Cal, is how do you see the season going next year? Those teams in green, those teams that are existing Premiership teams, do you think they're going to have an advantage being technically a higher level, or do you think that the increased competitiveness of the Division 1 teams coming up is maybe going to give them an advantage?
I mean, like if you look at these teams, right? I'm particularly looking at the South because I know the Southern teams better a lot more than the Northern teams, right? The teams that are coming up, coming up to the Premiership, these are a lot of them are either established teams or second teams of existing national team sides, right? So you're getting that competition. VPP are in around a long time. Chichester and Cardiff are both, the B teams or the A team, which are national. They get a lot of they're playing at a high level, so they won't be like adverse to playing that strong competition. But at the same time, right, obviously you guys are coming up as well, having the same situation with Wolves. Obviously, we've been part of it. You're now losing those games where, you're guaranteeing you're putting 50 points on the board, right, before you even step on the field. There's the games where realistically you're playing teams that aren't really your competition, right? And you can go through and you can ease through them games and maybe get yourself higher. Like in a case for Wolves, might play BPP on one game like last season, where you can be a bit more up for it. There's nowhere to hide in these ones. So having that struggle, getting acclimatized, trying to play your best football for 3 games, I think it's going to be a little bit harder. We're coming against, from the likes of, your Coventry Panthers, your Coventry Phoenix, Northants, all these teams, all these teams seem to have established quarterbacks coming through who know how to read defenses and know how to read them and get points on against the best defenses, they faced against over the last few years. So coming up against teams that might not be all put together to say, to adjust to every single thing, and you might see stuff from these teams that you haven't seen in the case of Wolves, Diablos, Storm, etc. You might not have seen in Div 1 football. It might take a bit of adjusting to, and they might be able to exploit that, and the defense is coming up. So I would agree. It's I think they're going to have an advantage at least early on. I think the first half of the season for sure.
Yeah, we've discussed. I think we discussed that as a club, haven't we, Lewis? Of how can we get ourselves ready for the level that we expect the Premiership to be up, whether that's scrimmages, whether that's however we manage that, whether that's film, however we manage that, we need to make sure that from game day one we're ready, because as a club we tend to be slow starters.
Yeah, I think clearly the step up for obviously us as a club, but also for the other teams that are coming from Div 1 into this new Prem is, it's a huge gulf in terms of the level of opposition that you're going to be playing week in, week out. Obviously, it's exciting that we're going to have competitive matches every week. Obviously, Callum alluded to some of the easier games that we've had over the last couple of years in Div 1 where, you know you're going to win it before turning up on the day. And that's not really interesting for us or for the opposition. And I think the new structure is obviously designed to try and minimise the number of matchups where that's happening. But yeah, obviously we're going to have a big step up in terms of level of experience of teams we're playing against. I think when I was looking down the list of all the teams in the Southeast, Southwest, really like the quote unquote easiest game that we'd have is Reading Diablos out of those. And that was a game that last year was like final drive, back and forth the whole game. And actually all of the other teams that we're going to be playing, like every game is going to be like that. And I think it's exciting obviously, but I think the level of experience that those teams in green have got of playing at that level already for the last couple of years or multiple years in many cases, certainly early in the season is going to show through, because even things like managing the clock better, managing the plays better, like Callum said, reading defenses, adjusting, adapting to what the other teams are doing. They're already used to doing that every week, whereas we've maybe not been required to do that as often, only a couple of games a year. So yeah, it'll be really interesting, but definitely a challenge for those teams coming up, in my view.
I completely agree. And I think that the biggest thing that I've relied upon for gaining experience in advance of what we hoped would be a promotion year and ended up being that, the final 2 game days that we had at the end of the season, unofficial game days, finals, obviously playing against a number of teams that we were either fighting for promotion with, and then teams that had already been promoted. And before that, obviously, we played at Flagpalooza. We were lucky enough to have the same squad at both days, and we knew going into Flagpalooza that we were not one of the higher ranked teams, and we knew that we had to be savvy in how we played those games. And I think that has improved our game nous, our game intellect going into what will be an incredibly tight season, I think, across the board, particularly for us, but I think for almost every team looking at there, because of that split, because we're looking at Leicester Huntsmen, who won Division 1, were the top team at the end of the season in Division 1. You then look at Sheffield Giants, who went 1-14, I think it was last year, 1-14-1, I think they went. But the gulf between those teams is not massive, and it will probably be a score. And I feel like pretty much every game you look at on this board, either team could win it, and most games are going to be decided by finer margins than a lot of Division 1 teams are used to, and a lot of Premiership teams are used to playing at that level.
I also think, sorry, get the point. Is that right? If you see some of these teams also come in who are in the existing teams, right? Who like you said, your Sheffield Giants, right, or 1-14. Again, using your Southern examples, I don't know how it was necessarily, but your Phoenix, Panthers, Rebels, whatever. The teams that weren't battling maybe for battling for that spot last year, when it came to those that second half of the season where you're not getting promoted, you're not getting to finals, you're not getting promoted. Has maybe the standard gone down a little bit? Has maybe a few less players are turning up to the final game days or whatnot? Maybe selling yourself some tournaments or just doing other activities with the summer. Whereas coming through a fresh season where the opposition, you're not playing your Smokes, your Readings, your Glasgows, whatnot every week. You're playing teams more of your standard. Are we going to see better performances from those sort of teams through the year rather than just maybe at the beginning? I think that could be the case as well.
Yeah, I think they've got more to play for. And as that an example, looking at, I know it wasn't this year, it was under the previous format, but Coventry Phoenix played both us and Victoria Park Panthers, admittedly, before I was part of the Wolves. But Danny, you were QB at that day. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, Coventry Phoenix beat both Panthers and Wolves to retain their place in the Premiership. So the level of competition between the bottom of what is the proverbial bottom, because we don't know again how competitive these teams will be, but the level between the proverbial bottom of the Premiership and the top of Division 1 now playing each other week in, week out. I mean, from an ex-QB's perspective, Danny, that must be quite a difficult thing to process and to gauge how competitive those games are going to be.
Yeah, you definitely felt like a different level of play, but at the same time, we're a completely different team now. The thing I kind of think back to is that COVID year where we were kind of grouped differently. I think it was just based on location. We played a lot of Prem teams, and our standard then was just so different to what we were used to. But obviously, yeah, we're a completely different team now. So yeah, I'm excited for it. It's going to be nice competing in games throughout the season and not kind of have those one-sided games. I think that's what everyone wants, and it's going to be the same for Div 1, where they'll be more competitive games as well throughout the season. So overall, I think it'll be good for everyone, really.
I think when it comes to that, like especially that COVID season, like I feel like in certain games, obviously there's some games where, you know, as Wolves we got beat quite heavily. You know, your Smokes. I remember the Rebels beat us quite handily. You come up against some teams, you can raise your level a bit. I remember we had quite a close game with Titans. I think it was like one of Lewis's first ever games. He got a pick six to start the game. And you know, there was a few points at the year where we maybe played a lot better than we would have if we came into it where we played, you know, your typical Div 1 teams to start the day. We might not have been as up for it as we were previously. So having that competition shows that, you know, for the sakes of Wolves, sake of Reading, Diablos, Tiger Sharks, etc., Nomads, their performance is going to go higher from this structure change.
I think the only other thing that I was going to point out on this is we've tried to be as equal and as even as possible, but the Southeast is going to likely end up with only 2 legacy Premiership teams, although arguably one of the strongest of those teams in London Rebels. But that could lend itself to one of those promoted teams taking the reins and driving forward. And we won't talk about ourselves and Reading because there's a question mark over where we're placed, but look at Norwich Nomads. They're kind of the outlier in that division, but you'd be fancying yourself if you're part of the Nomad setup that have been so competitive this season. Same with the Sharks and VPP that have always been at the top of the Division 1 when they've been there. One of those teams could definitely make a run, could definitely tip the rest and pip Spark to a berth at playoffs and give themselves a shot at the very least of getting promoted again.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, obviously the fact that 4 Southeast or legacy Southeast teams have gone up to the national, I think, you know, historically it's maybe been viewed the Southeast was a bit stronger than the Southwest in the Prem on average, and I think that's reflected in the fact more teams have gone up. But I definitely agree. There's a lot to play for in that division, in that conference. So, you know, regardless of how it falls between us and Reading, there's 4 teams that have come up from a similar level. I mean, you've got VPP, Nomads and just Tiger Sharks that were all in the top 6 rankings from Div 1. So clearly all, you know, at the top of what was the original Div 1. And definitely going to be vying and competing with the likes of Spark and Rebel, I would expect. I think there's a lot of interesting, exciting teams coming up from Div 1 as well. Like you obviously look at Leicester Huntsmen, you mentioned Norwich Nomads. Like there's a lot of teams there that you feel will really compete at this level. And I don't think there's any certainty that the finals for the Prem next year is going to be those 12 teams highlighted in green. Like there's going to be a lot of movement amongst that. Despite the kind of legacy and experience that they've got in the Prem, I think, you know, there are a lot of teams coming through that are going to compete and that are going to challenge those existing green teams.
And the one thing that's been lingering in the back of my mind, which is a possible thought, but by no means guaranteed, is with the fact we are approaching an Olympics and we have the first Olympics that Flag will be a part, and we now have a new national division. People, I mean, Cal speak from personal experience, but people that want to be part of that setup and want to be pushing for GB silver and GB gold spots will want to be in that national division. So I keep thinking in the back of my mind that there is a possibility that some of the highest level players across, those teams in green may move to national teams where they are exposing themselves to that one step higher of play again, in the hope of getting themselves a better chance at being part of national setup going forward. And I know, Cal, that's why you left the Wolves at the time you did, was to be a part of Premiership, but were needing to play at that level in order to further yourself. You'll now be playing at the national level. So I think it's difficult because there aren't hundreds and hundreds of teams for people to transfer to. There is only 12 in the national, as we've discussed, 4 of which are in Scotland. So that leaves 8 across the rest of the country. So getting to a national team could be a problem, and spots and roster availability. But you've got to assume that there are some high-level players across those teams highlighted in green that will be saying, I need to play somewhere that's in the national next year to further my own personal gains.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's going to be, like you said, there's going to be transfers. Admittedly, some of these teams are going to be weaker. Hear little things in the rumour mill that I can't speak of, but some of these teams you will see will get better, and there's the teams like potentially us, Glasgow, Cardiff, London, whoever, are going to benefit from that, and these teams are going to be stronger. So, it's like you said, this the reason why I moved last year was to play this competitive, the most competitive football. And I feel with the national division, that's sort of double what it was last year. So, if it was coming from the same situation for me personally, it'd be even more intrigued. So I can see why, if you are someone who wants to try and make the GB setup, or in the GB setup and try and improve your way, maybe from silver to gold, for example, I feel like would be make a lot of sense if you got a team at least local enough for you to train to get to playing in that national division would be an intriguing for your development.
I think especially it's there's not many teams that get promoted into the national in the way that they've designed the setup currently. So I think it's only one a year. So if you're sat there thinking my team's not going to be that team that's going up to the national, then you're probably thinking, where's the nearest team to me that's in the national? Like, it's definitely a valid concern for those teams in green to be thinking, who's going to be wanting to do that. It's real risk to them, I guess, and definitely an opportunity for the national to get some additional recruitment of some top talent.
Agreed. Okay. We'll move on then and talk about the elephant in red in the room, which is the fact that the talking point that we had internally amongst ourselves, not only part of the podcast, but at the club, is working out whether we will be sat within the southeast or the southwest. And to aid that conversation, we've got a slightly separate graphic that just pulls together some of the metrics that I know you were looking at, Lewis. Basically, there's 12 teams in the south, and that's excluding Leicester, who could very well be included, and including Norwich, who are definitely an outlier because they are further east, part of East Anglia, compared to some of the teams that are maybe more centrally based in the two Coventry and the Northants team, and a couple of teams in Wales. And what that means in turn is we think that this is a somewhat fair split of teams in each division. Obviously, Chichester staying in the southeast, their distance from them to Norwich is massive. But in turn, if they were to be included in the southwest, it would mean having to bump someone like the Northants Titans to the southeast, which feels just as incorrect. So there's definitely going to be a decision that the BAFA have to make around that. But as we see it, we think that if you accept that there are 5 teams set, there's then a discussion as to whether the Diablos or us are part of the southeast or the southwest. And I know you did a little bit of quick maths to look at distances, Lewis. But basically, both teams in the southwest, the distance, average journey to all of the games there's nothing in it. Absolutely nothing in it. In terms of the longest journey, it will both be to Swansea. The difference is about 25 miles. In turn, in the southeast, averagely, both teams have massively shorter travel distances. We have a slightly shorter average travel distance of 5 miles, which could be a deciding factor. And then in turn, the longest journey would be shortened to 90 for us, and Diablo's 81. It's an incredibly complex process for working it out, but what's your opinion having pulled it together?
Yeah, I think, we had a look through, obviously, the different distances, the journey, quick little Google Maps. It's not overly detailed modelling. But yeah, I mean, last year when there was a bit of uncertainty around what Div 1 would look like. The communications we had from CMG were basically saying that the decisions between the southeast, south central, southwest, how that was going to be divided up was basically a function of journey time that people would have. And that's what they defined, how they were going to decide it. So we've kind of assumed that they would use some sort of similar methodology this year in terms of dividing up the new Prem. It's obviously quite difficult to kind of group them together. You end up with really unpleasant groupings because you've got obviously that 3 teams that are kind of more Midlands with Coventry and Northampton, 2 teams in Wales, 3 teams in London, Norwich, then you've got like Chichester, us, and Reading, kind of more south central area. There's not really any easy grouping that fits into the 6. Like there will always be some sort of outlier. This seems to be the most sensible way. As you said, there's not really much in it between either us or Reading going into the southeast or the southwest. We're obviously that bit closer to those Midland teams, Coventry and Northampton. Reading are closer to the Welsh teams, so it's kind of 50-50. It's just going to be a case of kind of what they end up doing. You could equally try and split this into 3 lots of 4. You mentioned earlier, we've assumed that they're going to stick with 4 groups of 6. But if you were to split the South into 3 divisions, it's equally hard to try and get them into groups of 4, because again, you're just going to have some anomalies where they don't add up to 4. So yeah, I think we'll have to just wait and see, basically. But either way, I think we've got some fun games ahead, whichever of these 2 divisions the Bucks Wolves end up sitting in.
Yeah, we're going to be everyone, I think, especially in the south. I think everyone across all of the divisions are going to be staring at some long travel distances, but that is the nature of having a more competitive division. You have to be closer to, or you're naturally going to be further away because there are fewer teams competing at that level. And just on the same topic, we haven't got a graphic for talking about the same context with the Newcastle and Border City joining the Highlands, but I suspect it's a similar-ish statistic in the sense of theoretically one of them could stay in the north and Sheffield could be pushed out to the Highlands, but there isn't a convenient way for that to be aligned. Any other comments, questions, just looking at that distance marker?
Callum's looking at it thinking they all look like all right journey times to me versus what he's got to do in the national.
I mean, I just hope there's not a trip to Scotland. I say that with Flag in a year, maybe an Ironman. From the sounds of it, I don't think that's going to be the case anyway. I mean, it should be a trip or 2 to Manchester, a trip to Cardiff. It makes for good if you're staying overnight or something. It makes for a good social in the evening. So, yeah.
All right. On that very apt topic, we will take a break and we'll come back in a second to talk about the national division. Okay, welcome back. We are going to take minutes here, 15 minutes probably, to talk about the new national division, because we have our very own national member, Cal, here with us to help talk through some of the bits and pieces that we aren't as familiar with. So just to give everyone a refresher in case they haven't seen it, and I'll read it out just in case anyone is listening to this instead of watching it. Can't really do that with the Premiership because it's so dense. But with the National, we've got the National North with Glasgow Hornets, Manchester Titans, Manchester Crows, Aberdeen Oilcats, Grangemouth Broncos, and Edinburgh Outlaws. And then the new National South with London Smoke, Cardiff Hurricanes, London Fire, Reading Devils, Chichester Sharks, and Cheltenham Neptunes. Those teams are in no particular order. They are just the order in which I threw them onto the graphic. Okay, so this is kind of uncharted territory for British Flag, because for the first time in our history, the top 12 teams in the country are not only going to face each other within their smaller 6-team division, but you're also going to have 2 cross-conference days where you get to play everyone in the other division once, I believe, as well. That means, compared to the last few years, for the first time, Smoke and the Hornets are going to play each other as part of the regular season. It won't just be a post-season discussion of will they meet in the final. The intent of that is it should make the league far more competitive. It should weed out some of those teams that maybe rode a better record by performing against those teams that have not been promoted and remained in the Premiership. Alternatively, we may see that some of those teams are able to switch it on, and some of the larger, bigger teams might struggle. But I think that on the face of it, looking at all of the teams across both conferences, everyone can beat anyone. We were talking about this just before we started recording, but you've got to say that the London Fire are the weakest of those 12 teams. They were the 12th seed going into finals. They were the team that made it at the end by the skin of their teeth. But just as much as any of those teams, on their day, they could turn up with a team capable of beating pretty much anyone. I think that goes, because of the competitiveness of the division, that goes for everyone. I mean, we saw a number of upsets last year that I don't remember to heart or to memory, but I know there were a couple of upsets where one of the Manchester teams, or I think even you guys at Reading, Cal, lost a couple of games, or at least a game where you shouldn't, or you didn't think you were going to, you hoped not to. But the competitiveness of the National is now probably going to highlight that even more if you turn up to a game day and aren't 100% on it.
Yeah, I mean, like, we lost a game to obviously you see Cheltenham here. One where maybe we were thinking beforehand, we know it was going to be a competitive game and they're deserving national side. But we thought, possibly before, especially in a day where we had Cardiff, where we used that as a main threat, that we would go out and, again, be a competitive game for sure. But we beat Cheltenham and we didn't, Ash Lewis played a blinder of a game. They played some great defense over at Cheltenham as well. I managed to get that one. So every game is going to be competitive here. We used London Fire as maybe potentially the weakest team. We had 2 competitive games against them, particularly one where we were like, I can't remember the score exactly, but it might be like 25-6 at half time till we were down. Obviously, we came back and through that. And London Fire team, they're part of the Smoke organization. They got people like I was saying before we started this podcast, like they're going to have most likely Joe at QB, who arguably one of the most underrated QBs in Baffa, great quarterback. You got your established Smoke players that have been there a while. You got players like Dockers on defense, for example. But you also got players coming in who might not be ready, who are athletes and might not be ready for the Smoke just yet, maybe a year away from playing for them. That taking a year and playing with either Fire or Spark, and maybe Fire in this case, you get a few players who can just blitz past people. You had a player we turned up on the last game day of the season. I believe his name is Cordell. I might have got it wrong. A Canadian-American receiver come over who just torched me, and I think it's fair to say every other Reading DB that day. it was just electric. And I've already seen him play from the Champions Bowl streams, play with Smoke. So he's going to be someone who's playing probably Smoke next year. Maybe there's a couple of fire players going up as well, but there's also going to be, they train at Clapham Common in London. There's going to be a bunch of people coming over, whether it's Brits, Aussies, Americans, find the sport, come and train with the Smoke and get trained up. They got a great organisation there and going to get built up for a competitive team. So yeah, there's no weak teams in this old national division. Every game's going to be competitive. All 12 teams are arguably going to get stronger as well from where they were 12 months prior. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to it.
I think that the key point is that those teams will play each other, right? So, I mean, we know what it's like where you go through a season, you play against everyone in your division, beat them, win handily, and then come up against another team who maybe finished second in their own division, and suddenly it's a completely different ballgame. It tends to be that there is a variance in quality depending on where you are. There's so many teams in London there that sometimes the quality can be diluted, but sometimes the player pool is so high that those teams are of a greater quality averagely. In this instance, you have to play everyone at least once as the season goes on. So when you get to finals, I mean, everyone nowadays records film from games. So you're going to have film on every team that you could possibly face in a run, and everyone's going to have film on you, which is a different dynamic and an interesting dynamic. And I know that Glasgow and Smoke, or the Hornets and Smoke, both went 16-0 in their respective divisions last year, and are the perennial contenders, to be fair, across BAFA. But if they're playing opponents of an averagely better level throughout the course of the year, that might elevate their performance. It might mean that they slip up. It might mean that they wear themselves down much harder than having to be as well, not as competitive. But there are some teams in the Premiership last season that, as we've said before, that had pretty poor records, and Smoke could turn up or Glasgow could turn up against and basically wipe the floor with and move on. That's not going to be the case. You would assume this year that there's not going to be a massive game, and there's probably not going to be a blowout. And if it is, it's going to be completely unexpected.
Got a question for you, Cal, based on your experience playing against a number of these teams before. Do you feel like there's a kind of relative mismatch left over between the North versus the South next year? Like, do you see in the cross-conference games, would you be able to pick which conference is most likely to get the most wins on those days? Do you see like one conference being stronger than the other, or relatively equally matched?
I mean, I think for starters, I think if luckily when we did the whole promotion thing, it magically worked into 6 northern teams, six, seven teams. I think these are the best 6 best 12 teams in national division that are strong, and you've got so many good competitive games. It's really hard to tell, from the top, you got your Smoke and your Hornets facing each other, but right at the bottom, maybe who are the lowest teams coming down. Neptunes versus Orcats, for example, Broncos versus Sharks. These are games that honestly could go either way. These are very 12 strong teams who, I can't remember if I said this earlier, but they're arguably better than where they were, each 12 teams, than they were like 12 months ago. So each team's getting stronger. It's it's just sometimes maybe on a day where if you don't have your full squad, it might be a difference. If I use like Chichester, for example, from this past season, they didn't have on a few game days they were missing people. They were down to 5 and 6, and then maybe struggled and didn't get some results in games. Like they played Swansea, for example, and I know they lost Swansea to Swansea Hammerheads. Arguably, I know George got injured in that game, their quarterback. But it dropped results that and just made this 12 by the skin of their teeth. I think it came down to the final game against Rebels in the end to see who got promoted. But like Chichester, an established team, they were heavily, if you predict it before the season, they would have got in with ease. But it has that kind of bit of okay with them. Are they going to have a few people missing potentially this season as well? I know a few people are going to uni, so I don't know. That might not affect things. They might just be around again. Sports, the league's going to be from mid-April time anyway, most likely. So it might be back from uni at that stage anyway. It might not affect things, but it comes a case where if you're Chichester are going against, your like Aberdeen All Cats, for example, where personally, if I put two strongest teams against them, their two strongest teams, I would favour Chichester to win that game. But it might be a case of they don't have everyone. They might have a few people missing. They're down to 6, 7, whatnot. And Aberdeen at full strength. That could slide some things sometimes. So again, in that game, they might play Glasgow, where they might be favoured to lose that one. Doesn't matter if they got their strongest team or not. But again, availability is your best ability, right? So that could come down to through the season. That could come down to, with the travel. I don't know how cross conference is going to work. I don't know how. I know there was a talk I heard of potentially happening on one weekend. Potentially there was an idea that's sprouted. So you do it on the Saturday and Sunday, I think, up in Manchester, and just get all done in one swoop, which I think would be great. I think that'd be a great idea. But at the same time, if, for example, if that's a bad weekend for a team, and then not having that availability through those days, you could drop some results that way. But I mean, to go back to the question, it is, these other 12 best teams, there's not going to be many. There always will be the occasional blowout, especially with the high power offense like Smoke, Glasgow, etc. There is just going to be occasional bouts, but every game I feel is going to be competitive, right to the end. So, yeah,
on that? Do you think that some of those teams, because looking at the teams here, I mean, obviously Smoke and Fire are the only teams that are, an A and a B in this division, but Sharks have a B team in the Prem. Grangemouth have 2 B teams in the Prem. Titans have a B team. Obviously you guys have a B team. So many of these teams have B teams. Do you think there's going to be a push to ensuring that the national squads are better prepared, possibly at the cost of some of the Premiership teams, because of the importance and because of the competitiveness of those games? Could you see teams having a 2 or 3 or 1 or 2 extra members as part of those squads this year to cover for those instances?
I mean, maybe, but at the same time, I feel like it has the potential. If you're a strong team, there's players we talked about earlier with transfers, right? Players coming through. There might be some transfers that happen where logically, it's hard to make training every week. For example, it might not be your closest club, right? Who transfer into you. So you might be getting people come up that way rather than you're taking time away from B team players who might be there to sit the bench a little bit and just come on occasion, right? I feel like sometimes it might even be you having, in a way, less teams. You want to see, at times at least, you want to preserve some players, but at the same time, if you can get your best 5 athletes on the field, sometimes that's what you need to do. So every game being competitive, you might see some more, those DBs, your preliminary DB, but also known to have a great receiver. You might come on a bit more and play some offense in these high pressure games, which is going to be a majority of the fixtures you're going to get. On the reverse of that, with receivers playing DB and more strategic blitzing and all this other stuff, and having people who can be a second QB, a third QB, all these different stuff. So there's different ways to do it. I feel like if there's people good enough to go up, and like in Reading, using Reading as an example, we got plenty. I think there's a few players from the Diablos who wouldn't be amiss from like stepping up and feel like they could compete at that level. Obviously you've got both from an experience point of view, but also like we got some young players coming up as well, who I feel like could manage that challenge. But also it might, especially for the younger players' case, might be worth. The Prem is still obviously a high level, and you deserve to be there. Maybe it's worth keeping your reps at that stage, and playing. In Diablo's case, playing your Wolves, the Rebels, the Sharks, etc. Rather than just coming on in different situations, because like we said, every game is going to be so competitive. You don't want to pull your starters until the results in the bag, and the result probably is going to go right to the wire in a lot of these cases. So that was it. We want the best players on the field.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's true. It might be the other way. In fact, you have smaller or the same level squads just to maintain having the highest quality of player on the field at any one time, because at the highest level of our sport, most people can play multiple positions on both sides of the ball.
True, but it's also at the same time. It depends how your club looks. At the same time,
Of course.
See, you might don't know how we haven't set the teams for Reading this year yet. So might be a different approach, and you might see your Manchesters whatnot take 20 people to a game day, we might take 6, because we haven't done that, right? It's
different clubs have different approaches. Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, well, let's move on, and we will move on to our final segment, which is very early predictions. And we've asked everyone, including the one member of the podcast who's not here today, Gaz, to look at, and we will be sharing our predictions for both the National and the Premiership in just a moment. Okay, so for the first time as part of the Southside, we thought it would be good because for the National and the Premiership, we know the teams that are going to be competing. We can give pretty early, very early predictions for how we think that some of these teams might do, and taking into account everything we've discussed, these are very early. We had Gaz submit these outside the call, so I'll read out his predictions for the National North and National South first, with absolutely no context, because he's been unable to provide any context because he's not here, which is great. For the National North, he has put first place of, unsurprisingly, the Glasgow Hornets. Last place, he's put the Aberdeen Oil Cats. For the National South, his first place is the Cardiff Hurricanes, and his last place is London Fire. So, throwing it over to you, Cal, you can give a little bit of explanation, but what are your predictions for the National in the upcoming year, accepting your slight bias, I'm sure?
By the way, I thought when you were saying last place, I thought you said London Spoke for a second. I was like, that is a complete no context prediction. I mean, we'll start with the North. I mean, like, one of my things is always, if you're ever predicting something, like, if there's a reason to not predict the champions, then why would you go against them? Like, Hornets were 2 times now national champions, 2-time undefeated in the regular season, well, throughout the season, because they're national champs. Like, again, just an incredible team, highlighted by their defense, which is, just a GB player, GB coach who also plays. Like, it's a start of the team, and then you get to offense, which is, just I think it's just so many just underrated great players. You always see Nicky turn up in the final, throwing bombs. Players like Jules, who won MVP at the recent finals, Kerrance, who arguably one of the best 0.5s in the league, and Cammy just runs a disgusting skinny post over the top. It seems like he does it every game I watch him. So I'll be amiss to not say Glasgow. I mean, your Manchester Titans are going to be very competitive. We had a very competitive game against them. Obviously, finals this year. Not only us, but they gave Glasgow a right scare. I know. When it came to the season, I think Glasgow won quite comfortably. But when it came to finals, Manchester really turned it on. So if Manchester can play like that all year, give teams right, they're going to be competing for that top spot. But I'm still going to go Glasgow for the National North winners. And then right at the bottom, I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be very competitive. I'm probably just going to agree with Gaz here and say the Oil Cats. In a way of maybe just because with them, they are the furthest team, right? They're right northern Scotland. So again, coming to a point I made earlier about availability is your can be your best ability. I think they do actually travel quite well, but again, with all these trips, especially when it comes to cross conference, like they might struggle to field their best team each and every week. I know from what I gather, I think it's more of an established team. It's more of a it's experience. It's got players who are in their prime or you maybe get a bit older, rather than maybe in a case of like Reading, for example, where it's a bit more of a younger. I'm actually probably one of the older players in that Reading team, for example. I'm whippersnapper at 27, but like that. Just I'm pretty much solely doing it on that. But even in like Aberdeen's case, we played them twice at finals. They're a great team, especially in the second game. They gave us a right test, and you got someone like Scott at QB who I played quite a few times through tournaments. Who's a real gunslinger. He can make it in an offense move down the field. And they got some players on defense who are ball hawks, a good create turnovers. So yeah, I mean, I feel harsh picking a team, but I'm gonna go Aberdeen here for this one. And then going to the south, it's not biased. Reading are going to win it. I mean, if you obviously, I feel like we go. What would be inferior, most competitive games against Cardiff, against Smoke. I know the last 2 times we've met Cardiff in the league, last 2 seasons, we managed to get a result. I know 2 tight games. I know, especially obviously playing in the most recent one, it came down to an extra point, I believe. Yeah, little Home Alone special. So these are all competitive games. I just go for the point of maybe I'm a bit of bias, but I know we're all gearing up for it. I know we all want that, not just South title, but to win the national, prove ourselves as the best team in the country. So yeah, I back ourselves to do it. We're making strides to improve what already we've done. So yeah, I'm excited for the team. We've got some great players, and yeah, I feel like again, I mentioned Cardiff, I mentioned Smoke as well. It feels like that gap is just slowly decreasing a little bit. We're getting closer and closer. That we have 2 very close games against them from last season. I know there's one where, like in the first game, it felt like if we could get another stop or 2, we definitely could have won that game. I mean, it both came down to like the last play of the game in both situations. So, or last drive at least anyway. So it feels like we're just there, and I feel like in this next year, even though Smokey are going to be even better than they were from the previous year, I feel like we can do it. I feel like we can take over that top spot. And then as for last place, again, like it's all great teams here. I'm gonna copy Gaz and go Fire. It's the point is just these teams are all so strong. It's you just got to pick someone. And despite what I think, we mentioned Joe Pole next to QB, got some established Smoke guys, established players there, and they're gonna get some athletes come in, whatnot. They might be just a little bit inconsistent through the year, and that might just be their struggle. Potentially, that's what I'm going to go for. So I'm going to pick them to go last.
Well, absolute no surprise in you picking Reading to win. No one will grudge you that. And you know far more about the the national than we do and the teams that compete in the national, but we thought it'd be good fun to give everyone a chance. Danny, who have you put down?
I'll be honest, I've got not a Scooby-Doo who's going to win or lose, so I'm going to go over, well, Glasgow Hornets. No reason not to bet against them, really. It's been actually really cool going up on the Saturday to finals the last few years and seeing them kind of win the finals on the Saturday. They're just like a good, fun team to watch. No reason for me not to pick them to win it again, which would be quite cool. But I'll go All Cats just because Callum Dean said it. No opinion apart from that, really. And then to win the South, I believe in Cal. I believe in Reading. I'd like to see him win it, to be honest. It's actually quite cool to see how like far they've come. It wasn't that many years ago where we were kind of like level and sort of trading wins in a season, and now obviously they just like levels ahead. So yeah, a lot of respect to that team, and yeah, it would be nice to see Cal win it. So I'm gonna go for them, and yeah, fight to lose it. Why not?
I'll go to you, Lewis.
Yeah, I think probably mostly similar. I'd say, yeah, Hornets definitely have to be favourites for the North. So I'll be putting my money on those right now. I'd probably go one step further and say my money would be on them to win the national championship at the final days again next year. I think obviously back to back dominating performances throughout. So yeah, I'd go for them to win the whole thing as well. Losing in the North, it is a tough one. Again, there's a lot of teams there that I've not really seen play very much. So similar to Danny, just really basing it off going up on the Saturday to watch some of these teams play at finals. So I'm going to go for All Cats, just based on a couple of performances in terms of where the other teams are at, really. Similar to Cal, I think, there's a lot of good teams there, but somebody's going to have to come last. So we'll go with All Cats. As for the South, it is a tough one. I'm going to be less optimistic about Reading. I'm going to say Smoke. Go for the slightly more boring choice. Yeah, I just think, again, I agree with what Callum's saying. That gap is maybe closing. If you look back a few years ago where Smoke were, I think other teams are definitely catching them. But I'm going to go with them to hold that title one more year for the National South. Last team, I'm going to go with Sharks. I'm going to slightly buck the trend where everyone else has gone fire. I think obviously they, kind of snuck in towards the end of the season with some good results to make it into the new national format after making finals. So I'm going to go with there potentially being a risk of some availability impacts, some drops in terms of games that maybe they're not expecting. And yeah, I reckon Fire can continue to improve. Obviously, relatively new team compared to some of the others there in terms of how long they've been formed for. And obviously they've flown up, pretty much getting promoted every year where there's one on the table. So yeah, I'm going to say Fire can continue that trajectory and overtake Sharks and leave them in last place for National South.
And then my predictions, I can make it a clean sweep because I also think that the Hornets are probably going to hold on to the National North again. It's difficult to look past them for all of the reasons we've already said. I have gone slightly different in terms of the last place, and it's a rogue out of the blue shout. I've got the Crows down to finish last, and I'll be honest, that's purely off the back of them not, or their quarterback changed going into finals this year, I believe. So it's just off the back of that small level of uncertainty that when we're going into a season where it's going to be so competitive could be the small factor that hampers them. And for the National South, I have also chosen Reading Devils with bias well included. I think it's just a case of looking at the teams that are on the up and the teams that are on the down. Smoke are the team to beat, and it's Cardiff and Reading. I just feel like this is the year that one of them will supplant them. and I think Reading have a younger team, have more availability for people to, of bringing additional players, extra recruitment in, and possibly changing that narrative. And in turn, I've also chosen a different team to finish last, kind of something out of the blue. I've chosen the Neptunes, and my basis for that is they are the only team in the National South that do not have a feeder team, don't have a secondary B team. So I wonder if there's, leaning on the conversation we were having before, either a player pool that's too large for the competitiveness of the games if they maintain a single team, or alternatively, there's just not enough players and they have injuries and they have people that are unable to attend. Means that they aren't able to field their strongest team every week because they, like a lot of the teams in the South, will have an increased amount of travel. Okay.
They do have the Flood, by the way, which is kind of their second team in Outlaw.
Yeah.
So it might, obviously they might not be prepared enough to do it for BAFA, which is why I do Outlaw. I don't know obviously the reasoning. But yeah, they do have players coming through that way. But like you say.
Yeah, exactly. Again, I don't know a lot about Outlaw, but everything that I've experienced firsthand, which is limited, has been that the quality isn't the same as BAFA. That there are differences. It is generally more for leisure. I know that there are some people that play in the Outlaw Prem that would strongly disagree with that, but I've only seen what I've seen and the teams that are local to us in and around that area, and they're definitely not of the same standard. And I know that the Flood are one of the better teams, admittedly, but still, I think that it might be the case that they've got a less of a churn through of players compared to the rest of the teams on it, because we know that Chichester have probably the biggest churn through of young talent coming through in the country, with the Spitfires down there, obviously, and everyone else is, Reading are close enough to London, and Smoke and Fire are the organisation that, if you join in flag football, they're probably the first one you hear about. And we know that we look at Cardiff and look at what Cardiff Storm did this year. They were unbeaten through the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season in Division 1, admittedly, in what I don't think was as strong a Southwest as it has been in previous years. But there's clearly growth in Wales for the sport as well. But anyway, that's our haphazard predictions for the National. We will jump over and look at the Prem. Okay, and now looking at the slightly more complex, with 4 Division 4 Conference Premiership. We've done the same instance, first and last in each division. We are assuming, for the purposes of this prediction, that what we have on screen now, as is in those 4 conferences, is going to be the case. Again, there might be shift, there might be movement. We can't account for that. We can only account for what is our best guess at the moment, which is what you can see with the Highlands containing Newcastle Black Hawks, the West Lothian Chargers, Grangemouth Colts, Renfrewshire Raptors, Border City Centurions, and Grangemouth Mustangs. The North, quote unquote, will contain Sheffield Giants, Wigan Bandits, Salford Scorpions, Manchester Titans B, Leicester Huntsmen, Warrington Revolution. The Southwest will be Coventry Panthers, Coventry Phoenix, Northants Titans Blue, Swansea Hammersets, Cardiff Storm, and Reading Diablos. And the Southeast will be London Rebels, London Spark, Victoria Park Panthers, Norwich Nomads, Chichester Tiger Sharks, and the Buckinghamshire Wolves. And I will once again start with Gaz's predictions. For the Highlands division, he has got the Grangemouth Colts to finish first place, and the Border City Centurions to finish in last place. The Premiership North, he's got the Salford Scorpions to finish in first, and Warrington Revolution to finish in last. In the Southwest, he's got Northants Titans Blue to finish first, and Coventry Phoenix to finish last. And in the Premiership Southeast, he's got London Rebels to finish first, and the Victoria Park Panthers to finish last. And I will say, I think from Gaz's perspective, the only reason that he's got VPP to finish last is a little bit of inside knowledge we have that Sam, their quarterback, may not be around next season, and I know that will lend itself to. And I know they've got two guys that are both very capable quarterbacks that I know very well in Jordan Donner and Mike Mango. I presume Jordan will be the next man up, and I'm assuming that Gaz is just thinking that the level of opposition for someone playing their first full season at quarterback, although Jordan is possibly the most experienced quarterback to step into a role of a first time in BAFA. But I think that was his reasoning for that. I'll throw
Jordan won MVP at the Marcus Price Memorial.
Yeah, he did. I saw
that last weekend. So, yeah, good player.
Oh yeah, and Jordan's a fantastic player. He's also the nicest guy in the world. It's impossible. It's impossible to play against him because he's so nice. And he won't listen to this, but everyone that knows him will know that. All right, I'll throw over to you, Cal.
Cool. All right, let's do the Highlands. This is where my knowledge isn't going to be as so good, but I can still get some predictions and hopefully not get some hate from some teams here. I'm going to start with the winners of the Highlands. I'm going to a team that isn't Scottish, but Newcastle Blackhawks are going to be my predictions to win the Highlands division. I know actually, I mean, it can be a bit of a travel for them for a lot of game days, but I mean, they're traveling up for Winter League. Don't know what Newcastle Blackhawks team it is necessarily, but if we assumed it's their first team, they were traveling up anyway. And I know they're a team last year, which I think they were just quite inconsistent, I think. But were probably, when it came down to it, the toughest test for your Titans, your Crows, your Glasgows, etc., when they got to play them compared to the other, in this case, sort of like Northern teams. But I just feel like they, from seeing, I don't know too many players, but just seeing just a few bits and bobs. They seem quite an athletic team. They got some experience on there. I know it's Phil who is their, I'm assuming chairperson of the team, who brings everyone together. Got a lot of experience with him. He's a GB youth coach as well. But yeah, a bunch of talent on that team. So I'm going to go for Newcastle to win the Highlands division. And then, I'm just going to go for Grangemouth Mustangs just because, it's two Grangemouth teams in the same division. One team might be a bit more favoured. It could end up being the Colts for the same reason. But whatever team, I think they actually do it quite a little bit evenly. And I don't know the whole method for how they structure teams. But there always is going to be one team a bit better than the other, at least anyway. And I feel like that's where one of the teams are going to struggle. And I'm just going to say it's the Mustangs in this case. So Blackhawks top, Mustangs bottom for that one. In the North, I'm going to go for the new team, the team that, if it was a team differently, they could go in the South for this, but they fit in the North. They go for the Leicester Huntsmen to win it. Obviously, the Div 1 champions got a lot of young, talented players. This is a team that is for sure only just getting better. They're only just scratching the surface. Obviously, come from like a whole youth team as well, established by Neil Weimer. Excellent person, excellent guy, who's grown the team massively. And you see it from, the teams they have, the players they have, in the GB setup, either in Silvers, like players like Akil, who's going to be, if not the strongest receiver in the Prem, with arguably the best, in my opinion, apart from Adam here, obviously, and shout out BT12 as well. But the top three QBs would be those two and Marcus, who I'm sure I'll see him next weekend at trials. A very impressive quarterback with a cannon of an arm. And yeah, other players, there's Jake, there's a few other names there. There's just a lot of young talent that I think they can take on and beat these, the established teams of Sheffield, Wiggins, etc. For the Northern title. Going to pick Warrington as the division losers in this case. Not really much to say on this one. I just know when you guys faced them at the national finals this year, I know they had to forfeit, I think, early due to injury and stuff like that. But I'm just going to say that takes effect into next season. And that's how they struggle. I know they've been an established team for a while. Actually, used to play them quite a lot, really, like back in the early Wolves days. When Outlaw were doing their season was not during the year; it was like actually after the BAFA season. So a lot more teams that including us were part of it, and Warrington were part of it as well. So we often play Warrington in Northampton and places throughout the season, and it's still a few of the same players from there. But in this case, don't really got much to go off. So Warrington, I'm sorry, love you, but you're bottom. Southwest, I had it tough between a couple of teams there. I really think I think the three teams at the top, it could be very tight between those three teams that were, are still Prem teams essentially. And for me, I'm going to go with the Titans to win it. I just feel like it was a year where Titans were out of it quite a bit, especially during the second half of the year. I think they struggled quite a bit, and that was for multiple reasons. I know I used to having a few Americans come over, and I think they went back, whether they're deployed back to America or whatnot. So they missed a few players there. I know when we played them, they were really struggling with a few injuries. I know Subbers, who blitzes for them, also can play offense. He missed a lot of the BAFA season due to injury. I think Ollie Thibbles, who's their star receiver, missed a lot of time through to injury this season. So yeah, I know that they struggled maybe with some availability as well. So I think they come back a lot stronger for 2026. So yeah, gonna say they edged that one. And then in last place, again, it's gonna be. I think it's gonna be very tight. I think Cardiff are just gonna finish bottom of that one. Again, it's actually Storm are a very impressive side for what is. They got some experienced players in their team. Got people like Drew, who I play with at Big Bell for the first time on the same team as him. Who's a great experienced DB. Has really got that defense together, and they got a strong quarterback. Some talented players in that O. But that shows the level. If I'm putting them last, that this is a strong division they got here. So yeah, Cardiff are going to be bottom of that. And if I go to Southeast, I already praised them a bit earlier, but I feel like the Rebels will be the strongest team in this division. You just got they were. I could be wrong, but they were the 13 out of the 12 that made it. They were the one who just missed out. I know they played Chichester it came down to the final games of the season. They played Smoke, us, and Chichester, and start off. They had two very competitive games against us and Smoke. Came down to a last drive. Yeah, in our case, it was final drive or maybe last couple of drives to Smoke. I don't know. But yeah, it was between them and Chichester to go up, and Chichester made it in this case. Yeah, they got an established team. They got BT12, who's going to be, again, arguably one of the strongest quarterbacks in this division, with a good blend of experienced players like Don Fox at centre, players like Ben Slade, fantastic receiver, Silvers, but also players on defense as well. And I think that was their face. If they can take that up to another level in their defense, I feel that there's some potentially they struggle with in the Prem last season, and not necessarily going against your teams like your Reddings, your Chichester, Smoke, who put a fair few points to them, and they can play in this case. I know it's still obviously a very competitive division, but what would be slightly at least weaker opposition, they can form a bit more of identity on their defense, get things going. They'll probably recruit some players as well, as long as it's improving the players they already have, and yeah, be a stronger unit as a whole. So going to go Rebels in that case. And for the losers, not going to go Buxballs, don't worry. I'm going to go for a existing Prem team, and that is the London Spark. Again, these are 6 strong teams. There's a reason why they're here. Would deserve to be in the Prem. It's fair to say Spark struggled a bit last season. I think it was a hard ask from what Spark was previously, when they had players they had a few players move, I think, in the 2025 season from Spark to Fire, players like Joe at QB, a couple of players, I'm not sure their names, but are very talented players and strong parts of the Fire team that got to the national division last season. Yeah, I know that it was sort of people coming in, whether it's trying American football for the first time or a couple experienced players who are just getting reps from the team. I think they struggle with getting a quarterback in. So, it can be a case of they could just turn up with a QB and they'd be fine, right? And they'd be all good. And they might even, I could easily flip this and they could be the top team in this division quite easily. But I'm just going off of last season, how they got through. And I feel like it would be, if I would put some of the performances we put up in the games we played them, how they would compare against, Wolves, Nomads, Panthers, Sharks, they will definitely get wins for sure. And this is, again, not going to be a clear last place again. That said, they could be first. But I feel that would be the team that struggles. And if he can pick a team to struggle based off last season, I think I'll give Spark. So they're my predictions.
Yep. That's good. I'll throw it over to you, Danny, to give us your predictions next.
So for me, I've got Blackhawks to win, Highlands, Mustangs to come last. North, I've got
Copycat.
Could be more.
North, I've got there'll probably be a lot more of that. North, I've got Salford to win, and I'm going to go Manchester Titans Bees to come last, just because I'm still a bit salty about finals in Manchester. So have some of that. Southwest, I've got I'm going to go Hammerheads to win it. Just a vibe, just what I'm feeling, based off not a lot. And then Diablos to come last for that one. And then Southeast, I've got to go London Rebels to win it. Probably, we played not like that's Rebels team that I'm sure is there, but players from across different teams of different tournaments, and I've got a solid team for sure. And then to come last, I think this is the trickiest one because I probably should know more rather than just guessing, but I think I'm going to have to put Chichester Tiger Sharks to come last. I mean, we played them in the cross conference this year and they beat us with, I think, 6 players. So got a lot of sort of respect for them as a team. They're a great team, but I'm going to have to put them at the bottom for this one.
Why do you think in the cases you just put, why do you think a team with 6 players that beat you will finish below you next season? Interesting question to put out there.
I'm never going to pass at the bottom. And I think on we play that game a few more times. They'll probably win some more. We'll win some more. It seemed like a bit of a toss up. Who kind of ended up with the ball last, if I remember right. They ended up winning. Lewis just got robbed over the top on that.
Way to call me out like that. I'm sure you had a drop or two in the game.
No, that didn't happen. Don't worry about that.
So what you're saying is Chichester got lucky, and players like Sam and Ryan are trash.
What are you doing, Cal? What are you doing?
Trying to stir up some beef in the southeast.
Matt's a terrible QB. No, I love Matt. I don't want you to joke about that.
It felt like to me, I know VPP might not be the same team this year, just because we know more about them, and it felt like we could have got a win against Tiger Sharks this year. VPP, we played them properly game week 1 and they comfortably won. And then I know Nomads, we saw them play in the finals when they were still in. Great team, like Alistair QBing. And then it doesn't make sense for me to pick a Prem team that was already there, really. So I was kind of left with Tiger Sharks rather than actually thinking they're going to do awful, if I'm honest with you.
That's fair. I'll give more insight because I also had Tiger Sharks last, but I'll let Lewis go before I go into that.
Cool. So yeah, Prem predictions. So North, tough one really. I'm gonna go for the Black Hawks as well to win it. I think, to be fair, I don't know as much about most of these teams, but I think going off kind of records last year, how they competed with some of the teams that that secured promotion from the North Division, from the North Conference even into the National. I'm going to say that they can hold out and win this Prem Highlands. division. Maybe they'll ask for it to be rebranded if they win it, given they're not in the Highlands. As for losing this one, I'm also going to go for the Grangemouth Mustangs. Maybe a bit boring. Everyone's picked the same for this one, but yeah, I'm going to go for the Mustangs as well. Just again, I think in terms of the level of competition, I can see them just slipping into final place, albeit I think very competitive. For the North, I think obviously you got some strong teams there in terms of existing Prem teams, but I'm also going to agree with Callum. I'm going to go the Huntsmen continue their trajectory and win this. Also a team that I didn't really know that much about going into this season, the 2025 season. And then they come through and win the whole thing. I think when I saw them in the finals, I kind of thought that's basically the GB under 21 team. Like they've got so many talented players that are already playing in the GB setup, either in silvers or in under 21s. I see them continuing to improve and potentially even dominating this conference. So yeah, I've got them as my winners. Similar to Danny, a bit salty said about finals, but for a different reason. I'm going to pick Warrington Revolution to come last. I think, you know, out of the games that we played on that day, and I appreciate it was the end of the day, and they were tired and they had some injuries, but conceding after we travelled all the way up, I didn't enjoy, especially after the year before we travelled up with only 4 of us. So not trying to start any intra-conference beef, but I would say that I'm going to pick for them to go last versus the teams that they've got to play against. Southwest, Southeast ones, obviously a bit harder here because, you know, whoever we pick to go last is probably going to end up beating us and we'll live to regret it. But Southwest winners, I'm going to also go Northampton Titans Blues. Played them a couple of times over the years. They came to our turf war, pre-season turf war last year, played really well against us, played really well all day. I see them winning this conference next year. In terms of losing, this one's a bit tough. I would say I can kind of see an argument for a few of the teams here coming last. I think it's definitely going to be close at the bottom. Definitely see Callum's point around Cardiff Storm. I'd potentially also say like they're coming from what we've maybe termed as the slightly weaker Southwest Div 1 from last year. So when we talked about at the start of the call really about what was the impact going to be around teams that are kind of coming through from Div 1, whether they're going to be at a disadvantage, they've maybe got that exemplified in the fact that they're in a weaker Div 1 tier. So I can see that, but I'm actually going to go Coventry Phoenix. I think, you know, they maybe struggled a bit last year with the teams that they were playing against from what was the Prem. They're going to have 3 of those teams, of those 5 teams they played, still going to be there. So I think they'll continue to be at the bottom of that conference. I think Reading Diablos and Cardiff Storm are going to come in and hit the ground running despite coming from the lower tier. And I think they'll both be able to beat Phoenix. So yeah, that's why I'm going to pick Phoenix to go last. Southeast, very difficult to get away from Rebels winning it. Obviously, I'd like to sit here and say Bucks Wolves. I think we've got a bit of improving to do before we're competing with the Rebels, which I hope we can accomplish and put up some good games against them. But yeah, I'm going to have to say Rebels will win the Southeast. They're definitely the one to beat as we head into the year. To be fair, I'd say Norwich are up there as well. Obviously, you know, competing really well at Div 1 last year and at the finals, dominating a team that's going to have more experience playing together. So yeah, I think it's going to be tight at the top on this one. But yeah, Rebels to win it. In terms of coming last, I'm also going to go for the Chichester Tiger Sharks. I just think that, you know, when we come to playing these teams week in, week out, and they're playing all of these teams twice in the regular season, I just think over that extended period and extended number of matchups, I think they end up getting slightly outmatched and coming last. I know we obviously said they had a good regular season this year. Then they get to finals, play Norwich, and Norwich kind of beat them quite comfortably. So yeah, I think that potentially that's going to show through when they're playing against that level of opposition every week. So yeah, I'm going to go Chichester Tiger Sharks coming last in the Southeast.
Fair enough. And I'll wrap it up with similar picks as we'll see across the board. But In the Highlands, I also picked the Newcastle Black Hawks. I think between them and London Rebels, they are going to be the teams to beat in this division from my perspective of the existing teams. And I also picked the Greenwich Mustangs to lose, and that is based off the fact that the Colts didn't have a particularly good year, and the Mustangs are, again, we don't know whether they're a C team or whether they're a B2 team. But in any of those instances, both of those teams competing in the same division, I can only assume is going to weaken each other as opposed to strengthening each other. In the north, I've also chosen the Leicester Huntsmen for all the reasons we've spoken about. I think that the number of players they have that are up and coming and only improving at an electric rate, they're only going to be competitive. I think this division will be very competitive, and I think that unfortunately for Warrington Revolution, and it is not a slight on them turning up and not playing because it meant we got to go home slightly earlier, but I think that they just outmatched in that division. I know we didn't play a particularly strong version of them, and I know that some of the Sheffield Giants, as we said, I think won 14-1 last year. They're not going to be they had a torrid year last year, but I still think an established Premiership team. I think Revolution didn't come across to me as being able to compete with Titans Bees, who we played, Huntsmen, who won it all, and then 3 established Premiership sides. Southwest, I have gone with Swansea Hammerheads to win that division. I think this is a toss-up. I think it will be really determining how some of these teams perform over the first few weeks will kind of narrate their trajectory for the rest of the season. And I think that kind of leads into my pick for last, because while we've played Phoenix a couple of times over a few years, or the club have played, not me personally, but played Phoenix 3 times in 3 years, because we played them at Turf War as well. Year just gone in a game that was very close, that I think they let us win under controversial circumstances at the end. I think they obviously didn't have a particularly good year. Panthers didn't have a particularly good year. I think they were 3-9 or something. Storm, I don't know anything about, other than the fact that we played Exeter Falcons at finals, and although they had an incredibly long journey, we can't say that it was their full strength team, because we don't know, but it wasn't a particularly close game. And in previous years when we've played them, it's not been a particularly close game. So I don't know their strength, but I've picked the Diablos to finish bottom, just because I think that Storm will have an advantage over the Diablos. And from what we saw last year of the Diablos, they were a little bit inconsistent. Whether that is, I know they lost to the Isle of Wight Raptors, for example, and then we beat them with an XP with less than 30 seconds on the clock. So it feels like they're more hot and cold. I guess if they can sort that out, they'll be far more competitive. And then from Southeast, again, we've all said it, but Rebels, I think, are the team to beat. The strength of that side is easy to see from anyone looking outside in. They were the highest ranked seed not to get promoted. I'm sure, and I know that they were pretty unhappy with their season as a whole. They were 1 game out, but I think that they should have more than enough, as everyone said, against some teams that may be adjusting a little bit to Premiership football next year. And then in terms of finishing last, I've said, but I've also picked Tiger Sharks, and for context, that isn't a slight on them either. I just think that our evolution of a club, and as a team, and even more specifically my evolution last year, we played them as we were still finding our way, same as we played VPP before we'd found our way in game day 1, the first game day that I quarterbacked in a BAFA setting, and I feel like we got better as the year went on. So that's a reflection of what I think our progress was comparative to those teams, as opposed to their progress. Again, I don't know if VPP aren't going to have Sam. That does throw a question mark into the mix. Norwich will have more travel than a lot of teams in that division, so availability could factor into that for them as well. But I think that will wrap up all of our predictions, all 4 plus missing Gaz for 5. Thank you for anyone that has listened all the way through this episode. I don't know how long it will come out after post-production, but it's definitely been our longest episode so far. Lots of conversation, lots of points, and we wanted to make sure we got that bit about predictions in at the end. As always, follow us on social media, Spotify, Instagram, YouTube. Links have been throughout the this podcast. They'll be plastered all over social media. If you have thoughts, have suggestions, things you want to get across, feel free, comment on any of those platforms. And if you are interested in being a part of the podcast, of an episode going forward, you have an idea, something you'd like to discuss, always feel free to reach out to any of us that are regular members. Other than that, thank you, Cal, for taking your time out this evening to join us. Thank you, Duds. Thank you, Lewis, for joining me as always. And we will see you next time.